Morning, folks. It's Mr. Hayden. Wrapped up snuggy in his jacket. Little squishy bow there. It's weather-wise, it's trying to rain. They forecast rain. We've got nothing but sort of grey clouds, and it's a nice rainbow just a few minutes ago further back, but it's not a long walk today because obviously Golgo's do rain, so if it does start raining, he'll be pulling me home. It's the only time he can move really fast when it's raining and he wants to get out of it, then he'll go really quickly. Mighty kid. Okay. He says, well, I don't do rain because I'm a Golgo. Scotia doesn't mind. She's a bit tougher than him. But just put this bag in the bin. There we go. So, I don't think this video will be very long, really. I think that this is probably the hardest bit. Just this last little bit, which kind of takes us up to my story, takes us up to when my dad died, really. And I think it's strange because it's one of the happiest periods of my life, but it's also one of the hardest periods of my life. For the few years that we moved to the next house. Oh, Hayden's gonna do a poop. Number 2. Let's pick that up. So yeah, so after what happened in the last house that we were living in, and kind of the breakdown that I had, I think I kind of shut down emotionally. I think I actually made a conscious decision that because nobody cared and there was no point, crying, or I kind of took what my mother had said, pull yourself together, and I kind of did that, I guess, and I kind of shut down. Hang on, Hayden. I kind of shut down emotionally. Let's put this up. And so, I don't remember any other episodes of me sort of crying and, feeling that I couldn't cope. I think I just kind of shut down emotionally. Hang on a minute. Hey, you're tangling me up. There we go. So my mum had obviously been ringing. She'd obviously been ringing the council endlessly. She was, always on the phone trying to get another council house. And I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? She was in a council house. The council had housed her, and then, because of my father, she then had to keep removing. And obviously, there she is pleading for another home. Anyway, she got one, and we moved again just before I was 11 to a council house further into the village from where we were already living. I mean, it was really just round the corner. And it was a 3-bed council house, massive back garden, massive back garden. And I was about to turn 11, so obviously I was going to go up to the comprehensive, the secondary school, and my brother, who was just about to turn 16, it's alright, Scotia's just eaten some grass and she's just been sick, but she's fine. She does that anyway. She sorts herself out. So yeah, we moved, and again we moved without my dad. And then lo and behold, not long after, along he comes again, and he joins us. And we then entered, I think, probably the last 2 years of his life, up until he died. And I think it was the worst years. It was the worst years that I witnessed, really, or that I remember, because it happened so sort of, regularly every day. And my mother was still drinking, obviously. Dad was getting more and more violent. Anyway, he moved in and we were back to normal, and the usual, I stopped drinking, and as I say, my brother was about to turn 16, so there was big conversations about whether he was going to stay on at the school he was at and go into the sixth form, or what he was going to do. And so there was a lot of discussion in the home about what he was going to be doing. And I can remember being in the front room, and Mum and Dad were arguing over my brother and what he was going to do and what was best for him, etc. And I remember my dad started shouting at my mum, saying, "Oh, it's always about him, isn't it?" Meaning my brother. What about your daughter? I just started secondary school, obviously, so that was a major thing for me. And I look back on that and I think, that's where my dad kind of treated me a little bit different from my brother, in the sense that he was trying to get through to Mum, because she doted on my brother. She did. She adored him. She much preferred boys to girls, and she actually said that. So I think that's probably why I grew up as a tomboy, really, because I tried to kind of be one of the boys. So this was all going on, and then it was my brother decided he was going to go into the army straight from school, 16, and he joined the junior leaders at 16, and I can remember we went and watched him passing out, and it was great. It was what he wanted, it was what he needed, actually. And so he went off and did his training and all that, and did what he was doing. And then later on, I'm so proud of him, we all are. He went and got his Green Beret, did his commando course and got his Green Beret, and we were incredibly proud, still are incredibly proud of him today for that, considering what he went through. And he would come home on leave, obviously, and he things weren't great things weren't great between any of us, and as I say, the violence was getting worse. But my dream came true, and I kind of think that maybe it was because, you know, all the focus was on my brother, and maybe, I don't know, maybe my dad felt that it would help me in that respect. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? He was so violent, and yet he was so cruel. Yet, let's go down this way, kids, because we don't need to go miles this morning, do we? Because you're a bit. Come on, we'll go this way. We'll go this way. And I was at the riding stables, which had moved from the original little village it was in, and it had moved a few miles down the road. So it was further to get to, but I still spent all my time at the riding stables, and you know, it's my life, it was my escape. I can remember, you know, every weekend, every holiday, you know, I'd either get a lift, or I would actually cycle, or I even walked a couple of times to where the stables were, and you know, it was everything to me. So my dream finally came true. There was a farm just up the road from where we lived, literally. It's a morning walk. It's still there today, I believe. And it was owned by the lord of the manor, who had lots of, you know, grazing and stuff. So I'd been riding this particular pony at the riding stables called Sherry, and she was a 13-2 little dark bay mare, and she'd been loaned to the riding school for a few years, and she'd actually been caught by a stallion that was out in a field, and she'd been caught and ended up having a foal. And when I started riding her, we went on a 3-day event, and I remember my brother came actually, and we had to stay over and work with the horses, and we went on big hacks and things, and I rode Sherry, obviously, and she was really quite aggressive. My friends who knew her, we used to refer to her as Mule because she had really long ears. And she was one heck of a character. I mean, she was lush. She was, and I remember no one could tack her up. And they used to say to me, you know, she'll let you tack her up. So, you know, so I used to tack her up, ride her, and she used to put her ears flat back and, you know, start trying to bite you. And anyway, one day, my dad came home from the pub or whatever, and he'd done some inquiries, and they managed to secure some grazing up at this farm. And it wasn't very expensive. It was so much money. It had a couple of old, you know, sort of basic stables. Excuse me, I'm just gonna let this ratty tatty off because she's doing my head in. She keeps throwing herself on the ground and rolling, because that's what you do, isn't it? So we got this. My dad said he could have a pony, and it just so happened that the lady who owned, the family that owned Sherry, they didn't want her. She'd outgrown, you know, the kids had outgrown her, and basically they'd given her to the riding stables. And so they said, "I can have her for nothing." and my dad had secured grazing, and it was my dream come true. Dream come true. I mean, everything I'd always wanted, walking after my mum into every room of the house all day saying, I want a pony, I want a pony. Look at this dog, she's nuts. You're nuts. Yeah, you are. Put your ear roll down. So, there began, one of the best parts of my life. I had my own pony, and there were a couple of people who approached, because we obviously had to pay for the grazing, but we were allowed to have ponies and horses there. So there were a couple of other people that, put their ponies there, and it was just awesome, absolutely awesome. And it was my life. I loved it. I loved the ponies. I loved the horses. I loved everything. And I met a girl who was a friend of another girl who had a pony, and she was grazing it up where mine was, and we became firm friends. And again, I met up with her when I went back to England last year, and we had such fun. She used to ride my friend's pony and other ponies, and we used to go off and we had adventures. I mean, we would we would do what kids do with ponies. We would we went to horse shows. We just loved it. And my pony kept getting bigger, and as I say, she'd been caught by this stallion, and she'd had a foal a couple of years previously, and anyway, she started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and obviously I'm still riding her. And one day we're kind of thinking, well, is there any chance she could actually be a foal again? And the riding stables were like, well, no, don't think so. Although apparently this same stallion was still about. Anyway, we called the vet out eventually, because I was still riding her and I needed to know. And he said, yes, she's pregnant. I can feel the baby. She's in foal. So that was it was a shock, obviously, because we weren't expecting it. I'd got this pony free, and the people hadn't wanted her, but she was in foal. And I think it was about 2 months after that, a foal arrived, gorgeous little chestnut filly, and I'd walked my pony all the way to the riding stables so that she could have the baby there, because we didn't have the setup really. The Scout stables weren't really set up to have a mare and a foal. So I remember walking over, and a couple of days later I got a phone call from the lady from the riding stables, and there was Sherry, this beautiful little chestnut filly. And so obviously, she stayed there with the baby for a bit, and then we brought her back to the farm, and she was amazing. My brother loved her. My brother used to come home from leave from the army, and we used to go out the farm, and we got her used to wearing a head collar, and we got her fairly tame. And, but I mean, I was never kind of thinking of keeping the youngster. It was the best thing for her to be sold. So the baby was weaned. We called her Peppy, Tia Peppy, because obviously her mother was Sherry, and I think her last baby had been called Bacardi, that had been born. So we kind of carried on the theme of the alcohol. Why wouldn't you? You know. Got to laugh at me. Anyway, she was called Tia Pepe, and we sold her to a lovely home. And, she was the sweetest of girls. And then obviously Sherry recovered, and I carried on riding her, and we just, I must have stunk her horses all the time because I just loved them, and I still love them now, obviously, and I just, I learned so much. And so back to, what was going on at home. Just put the skirts back on the lead here, it's starting to rain. What was going on at home was just getting worse and worse, and my father was just off his head, really. And the worst bit for me, I think, out of all the things that happened with my father, was when he used to start. I mean, my mum would rile him up. She was no innocent, You'd think, oh, just leave Dad alone, just leave him alone because he's going to kick off. And she would keep winding him up because, of course, she was drinking as well. And then once he was wound up, that was it. It was just madness. And yeah, I think the worst thing for me was he started going into the kitchen every night, and he would open the knife drawer. Bearing in mind he'd already stabbed somebody years before. It's an absolute miracle that, nothing else happened. But every time he would lose it, he would go to the knife drawer in the kitchen and pull out a bloody carving knife. Excuse my language. And he would get my mum in the corner with a knife at her throat. But I'd be sitting there, absolutely terrified, obviously, that, that he was going to kill her. And again, I'd scream at him and I'd go, don't Dad. And he used to swear in Spanish. I mentioned before he used to swear in Spanish, but he always used to end it with this phrase at the end, which was "na puta." And I remember I went and got a Spanish dictionary. I actually went to Smith's and bought a little Spanish dictionary to find out what it meant. And it means whore, basically, in Spanish. And it's one of the most derogatory terms you can say to a woman. And he used that with my mother every, this tirade of Spanish would come out, stream of Spanish, and then "na puta" on the end of it. And the knives, I think, were the scariest things for me, because I couldn't physically do anything. I couldn't go and take the knives off my dad. I couldn't. So I just used to kind of sit glued to the sofa in the front room. And the other thing is that we had this little Jack Russell called Buzz, and he was an amazing little dog. He moved with us. And I mean, this was the last property that I lived at, with my father. And this little Jack Russell, whenever my dad would start on my mum, would try to bite my dad to protect my mum. And it was, it was awful. It was so awful, because this one day Dad decided to pick the poker up. We used to have an open fire, and he picked the poker up and he just smashed the dog over the head with the poker. And the dog survived. The dog was okay, but he was never right after that, obviously. It was something, and every night, I'd go up into my bedroom and I could hear them arguing downstairs. I mean, me and my brother had spent years sitting on the stairs listening to the arguments, and he would go up to the attic. We had an attic in this house, the last house that we were living at with him. And as I say, I said my mother had actually burnt all his RAF uniforms and all his, stuff to do with the RAF. But he had this blue bag that he kept in the attic, and every time they argued, which was every day, and it was usually in the evening, he'd go up into the attic to drag this flipping blue bag out to pack his stuff, again thinking he was going off flying. And of course Mum would say, "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Frank." She'd be pulling it one way and he'd be pulling the bag the other, and then he'd knock her down, and again he used to lock her out of the house and say, "You let her in and I'll kill you." And Mum would be there going, "Lucy, don't listen to her, just let him in, let me in." And but I think the knives for me were the worst, because there was always that fear, because he'd actually or allegedly done, stabbed somebody before. It would have been nothing, and he was a type of person that would have stabbed my mum and then cried afterwards and gone, "Oh, I didn't mean it, I loved her," So it was all getting more and more worse and worse, and it was great with my pony, because I used to ride her down to the house and take her into the back garden, because we had a huge back garden, and my dad, as I say, used to grow vegetables, and we ate really well. And so I used to bring the pony in, and we had a little patch of grass, and she used to graze there, and I used to sit and clean my tack, and and that, I am so thankful for that, because had I not had that, it would have been horrendous. And I can remember I had this really bad accident. I was riding someone else's pony, and she was a bit of a fiery pony, and we were riding bareback, and I was with another friend, school friend, and anyway, the horse took off, bolted. It was my fault. We were just riding her in a head collar, and some kids spooked her up by a playing field, and she just took off, and of course I couldn't control her. I only had a head collar on. My friend, who was on the back, fell off and was injured, and I managed to stay on, but I ended up underneath, hanging onto the horse's neck, and she was just galloping full pelt down this new tarmac road that they'd just laid. I didn't have a hat on. Another stupid thing. Don't ever ride without a hat. And my head was bouncing off the tarmac road, but I still, had my arms around her neck. Obviously, she then trampled my leg, and I obviously let go and fell on the ground. And fortunately, there were some people at the bottom by the bridge, and they caught hold of her. They managed to catch hold of her. And I'd obviously been knocked slightly unconscious, and all my jeans were ripped, and my leg was bleeding, and my head was bleeding, but I knew that I had to get the pony, and I knew also that I had to get back on her, because otherwise I wouldn't have ever got on another horse again. So my friend's parents, who lived just over the road, they said, Lucy, you know, we've got to take you to the hospital. And all. I said, no, I've got to get the horse back to the farm. I've got to sort the horse out. You know, I'll be fine. So I literally took the pony back up to the farm, and I think my friend's mum had kind of bandaged my knee up because it was all full of tarmac and it had been ripped, and my arm was ripped open, and she said, look, you need to go to the hospital. And then I said, no, the horse comes first, you know, I've got to sort the horse out. It wasn't even my horse, it was belonged to somebody else, but obviously they became aware and they were fine about it. The horse wasn't hurt. So I got back on the horse, I took it back at the farm, I got on it again, I rode it, turned it back out, sorted, went home. And when I walked in, both my parents were pissed, as usual, and just waiting to cross the road here. And I went back home, as I say, and I went up to the bathroom, and I was also trying to clean my wounds up. Okay. I was also trying to clean my wounds up, and my mum eventually came upstairs, and she walked into the bathroom, and I was kind of lying on the floor. And she said, oh, my goodness, why didn't you tell me? I said, I did. You saw me when I walked in the door. And obviously, you know, because she was pissed. Anyway, she came up and she said, oh, not getting to the hospital. And then I think my dad probably drove me to the hospital drunk, obviously. But there were numerous incidents like that where I would be injured, and you know, you just had to deal with it yourself. You couldn't rely on your parents to look after you in that respect. So yeah, I mean, as I say, my brother would come back from the army, and he didn't want to come home, I don't think. And not too long after he met the lady that is now his wife, and I think he spent most of his time with her. She came and visited, and Mum was vile to her, and yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't good, and you know, when we used to have Christmas, you know, Christmas would be great. We'd have loads of food, but you know, my parents would be drunk before it was time to eat, and we always used to eat around about 7:30 on Christmas night. And of course, by that time, both of them were absolutely pissed out their faces. So we would start off having Christmas dinner, and then it would end up the wall, or the dog would end up wearing it. You know, the number of times the dinner would be thrown against the wall, and all hell would let loose. And right, just coming back towards mine now. As I say, the weather's not very good, so I can't stay out too long. And also, my dad had had a couple of strokes, which had left him sort of slightly paralysed down one side, and the local kids, when I started secondary school, come here. When I started secondary school, and I was up the farm with the pony, the kids used to bully me because they basically thought I was posh and rich because I had a pony, and it wasn't that at all. I mean, I'd had the pony for nothing, and we were only paying sort of nominal, you know, grazing fees. So you know, everything was getting worse and worse and worse. And so I'm just standing outside here, just before I take the dogs in. But it was all getting worse and worse, and I remember this one day. I can remember it really vividly. I was downstairs in the hall, and Mum was ironing at the top of the stairs, and she just had another argument with Dad, and he stormed up the farm. He used to go and cut wood up the farm, and you know, as I say, when he was sober, which was probably for about an hour a day in the morning before he hit the pub, he was lovely. And you know, he used to ride my pony, and we used to have some lovely conversations. But then he would just turn into an absolute monster after he'd had the booze. And of course, obviously, his tolerance levels had gone out the window by that time. And I can remember I can remember it so vividly. Mum was standing at the top of the stairs crying, as she did, you know, regularly. And she started screaming out to God. And she said, God, please take him away. Please end this. We can't go on like this, you know. Please do something. And she said, for God's sake, you know, why can't he just drop dead? And she was, you know, crying and crying and crying. I can remember staring out the window in the hall, just staring out the window, you know, because I don't think any of us could have gone on much longer. I think had it gone on much longer, I think he would have quite possibly stuck a knife in my mother. So what I'll do is I'll stop there, and then I'll pick up with the next video with my dad's death, and then going on from there. But the weather's not good. I've got to get the dogs in, so I'm sorry if I'm a bit vacant this morning. It's just I'm trying to look at the dogs and the weather and crossing the road, and it's not easy. So I'm going to end it there, and then I'll pick up on his death on the next video, which I will do today. So just bear with me.